What is up, Broncos fans? The Denver Broncos show back here again to do a video for the first time in a very, very long time. I do apologize for that. The end of 2016 was just so hectic for me. I had a lot of personal things going on, a lot of tragedies happen within my circle, I guess, of family and friends. And again, just things happening that were more important than making a weekly video on YouTube about the Denver Broncos. So I do apologize that I didn't make a video or make videos this season. I definitely wanted to. This was definitely an interesting season for the Broncos, to say the least. A disappointing one for sure. But I felt now was a good time to come back and make a video because of all the news that has come out recently surrounding the Broncos, and just kind of wanted to touch on that and kind of recap the season a little bit briefly here in this video, give my take on what went down this year for the Broncos. Obviously, we finished 9-7, which is not ideal. Barely missed the playoffs, so we weren't able to repeat as Super Bowl champions. Weren't able to even defend our crown as champions, which is obviously disappointing. And then obviously after watching last week's AFC wildcard games with Houston and Oakland, and then the pathetic game that was Pittsburgh versus Miami, just even more frustrating to see that we weren't able to make it in the playoffs. And then obviously this year also ended a streak of 5 straight years of winning the division, and being AFC West champions. So that was a hard pill to swallow, obviously, with Kansas City winning it this year and Oakland being so dominant. It was just it was a tough season for the Broncos. Primarily there was a lot of problems on the offensive side of the football, to say the least. The defense pretty much performed about as well as they could this year, and you can definitely tell at times this season the defense was visibly frustrated with having to be on the field so much and with the lack of production from the offensive side of the football. So again, just a real disappointing season, to say the least, as a Broncos fan. Not really much to say, just could never really get in a rhythm this year. Consistency obviously was a big issue, primarily on the offensive side of the football. The offensive line was maybe the worst offensive line group I've seen in my time as a Broncos fan, definitely in recent memory. And then obviously the whole quarterback issues and just again, no consistency this year from the Broncos, especially on the offensive side of the football, and it cost us, and obviously it cost us a chance at making the playoffs and defending our crown as Super Bowl champions. But what compiled that even more of it being a disappointing season is after the season you get this bomb dropped on us that Gary Kubiak, after only 2 seasons, steps down from his head coaching duties and is no longer the head coach of the Denver Broncos. That was tough to see. I wasn't too surprised by it, because if you watch this season and you watch the lack of execution and lack of focus that it seemed to be there on the offensive side of the football, and you add in the fact that the play calling this year was terrible, and that's kind of Gary Kubiak's bread and butter. I mean, the play calling at times was just so terrible, so predictable, so lazy. It was easy to tell there was something wrong there with Kubiak and the preparation, especially on the offensive side of that football. And Kubiak even said as much in his press conference at the end of the year when he announced that he would be stepping down as the head coach of the Broncos. He mentioned he just didn't really have the focus or the drive that this job takes and this position takes, especially when you're a head coach not only at this level but of a contending team like the Broncos, that want to compete every year and be in the playoffs every year. So you definitely could tell there was something wrong with Kubiak, and he confirmed that in his farewell press conference. And it's just sad, man. I mean, Gary Kubiak is a guy that means a lot to this community, means a lot to this state. This organization has done a lot for this organization, not only as a player and a coordinator, but obviously now as a head coach. And we had great success with him in the 2 seasons that he was here. We went 21-12 in 2 seasons under Gary Kubiak in the regular season. Obviously won an AFC West division title, won an AFC Conference championship, obviously won a Super Bowl championship, becoming Super Bowl 50 champions. So it's just sad to see Kubiak go out on these terms. And 2 years ago when we hired Gary Kubiak, I don't think anyone saw this coming. But obviously recently, even before this year, even last year, there was some rumblings about Kubiak having some health problems. Obviously had some problems with migraines last season, I believe, and over the summer. So this wasn't really surprising in terms of him stepping down due to health reasons and due to the fact that he doesn't have the focus that it takes to to do this job at the best of his abilities. It definitely showed this season, but it really kind of pulls at your heartstrings as a Broncos fan to see Kubiak leave in this manner. But all I gotta say to Kubes is thank you. And he will always be a legend in my eyes, especially from a Denver football standpoint. And I thank him for everything he's done for not only this organization in terms of winning football games and obviously doing a lot as the head coach and as an offensive coordinator and as a backup quarterback, back in the day with Elway, but what he's done for the community, man. Him and his family are so proud to be Coloradoans and are so proud to be a part of this organization and this city and this state. It's humbling to see that from someone that's your head coach. So. Of the biggest sports team in your city. So thank you to Gary Kubiak, and I wish him and his family the best of luck. It was a magical 2 years to have him as our head coach, and I thank him for getting the job done finally for us and getting that Super Bowl 50 win last year. And I'm sure he'll do great things outside of football. And farewell to Kubes, incredible coach, incredible human being. And the Broncos organization, and I think I speak for a lot of Broncos fans, will definitely miss him in years to come. Now that I touched on that, just kind of recapping the season there briefly and Kubiak stepping down, let's get into the kind of heart of this video of what I really want to talk about. I'm sure most of you know by now. It came out yesterday. It was made official yesterday afternoon. The Broncos hired their new head coach. We hired Vance Joseph, who is the former defensive coordinator of the Miami Dolphins. He is now the head coach of the Denver Broncos. We signed him to a 4-year deal, same size deal that we signed to Kubiak 2 years ago. So it's a hire that has definitely been fairly criticized, especially in the local media, because a lot of people were really set on the Broncos hiring Kyle Shanahan, and I'll be the first to admit Kyle Shanahan was the guy that I wanted the most. He was my number one target of all the names that were being thrown out there. But Vance Joseph, for me, was definitely a close second on that list of targets. So I'm not super disappointed in this hiring of Vance Joseph, like it seems a lot of local people and local media seem to be. But I do, but I will admit I am a little disappointed to see that we didn't hire Kyle Shanahan, because I think he fits more of what we need currently as a team and from our head coach. But nonetheless, we hire Vance Joseph again, former defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins last season. Only 44 years old, so you like that. He's a young coach. Hopefully this is going to be a long-term coach for us, because it seems ever since we hired Elway as a president, we've been running through coaches like nothing else. So I'm hoping this hiring of Vance Joseph is a long-term hire. You got a guy here that has ties to the community, ties to the state. He's a former quarterback and running back at the University of Colorado, of course, for the CU Buffs. He played in 17 games in the NFL as a defensive back for the Indianapolis Colts and the New York Jets. So he has prior playing experience, and he loved that he has prior familiarity with the community, being a former player at CU in the early to mid 90s. So look at his career as a coach. He's been around the block. He spent 18 years as an assistant coach on various different levels, whether it be at the collegiate level or the NFL level. But just looking at his experience as a coach from the NFL level, he was a defensive back coach for the Cincinnati Bengals, San Francisco 49ers, and Houston Texans. I believe he did actually work under Gary Kubiak and Wade Phillips during his time in Houston, so that's kind of ironic there. And of course was the defensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins last season, which isn't saying much. Miami was not a great defense last year. They had a streak there in the middle of the season where they compiled a couple good games when they went on that winning streak. But all in all, they weren't a great defensive unit last season, to say the least. So him being the defensive coordinator of the Dolphins definitely wasn't the reason why he was hired, so to say, because the job that he did last year with the Dolphins defense, it wasn't anything to call home about. You look at the Dolphins defense last season, they were ranked 29th in the NFL in total defense, 15th in the NFL in passing defense, and 30th in the NFL in rushing defense. So it's not like Vance Joseph did this amazing rebuild of Miami's defense, but there's no question that this is a guy that is coming into a situation with our defense in terms of just sheer talent. He's going to have a lot more to work with here in Denver, and I don't think it's fair to say just because he didn't have a great first year as a defensive coordinator with Miami that he's not a great coach or a great defensive mind. I think he is, and I do think he improved that secondary, especially in Miami. Again, they were the 15th ranked passing defense in the NFL, which isn't bad at all, but still didn't do any marvelous things there in Miami as a defensive coordinator. But when you hear some of the reasons why Vance Joseph was hired in the first place, it doesn't seem like the Broncos, this isn't an X and O's type hire. This is more of a locker room personality type hire, because one thing about last season is, well, I don't think our team was dysfunctional by any means. If you're talking about a team like the Browns or the Niners, we weren't dysfunctional on that level, but there definitely was some interplay there in the locker room. There was definitely rumblings about the defense not getting along with the offense, primarily the offensive line, and Russell Okung and Aqib Talib having a little spat there towards the end of the season. And obviously, things like that happen in the locker room because of frustration, and you're losing, and you're the defending champs are not playing well, all that good stuff. But it also starts with the coach, and it starts with your head man in the locker room, and it trickles. It's got a trickle down effect. So I think why Vance Joseph was hired was to kind of restabilize that locker room. And everything you hear about Vance Joseph, whether it be from former colleagues or his former players, is this guy is a great guy to work with. He's a leader of men. That's something I've heard a lot that's been said about him, and that he was hired because of his leadership ability. He's a player's coach. You hear that constantly. His players love him. And his ability to communicate with players and manage people, manage relationships. I think that was kind of the main reason he was hired, especially over a guy like Kyle Shanahan, because this is a guy that seems to have a ton of charisma. He kind of has that infectious personality. People want to be around him, and I definitely think he's going to keep that swagger with our defense. I think our defense is going to love this guy from day one. And I do think he'll help kind of restabilize our locker room and kind of bring back that chemistry and unity that we had as a team a year ago when, of course, we won Super Bowl 50, which just didn't seem to be there this season. But going back to my original point of what I mentioned when I first talked about us hiring Vance Joseph, is this really the coach that we need right now for this current team and the current problems that we have? And that's a question that I'm kind of not sure of. I like Vance Joseph as a person. I like him as a coach. I think he's a great fit for our team currently, especially with our defense. And I think he's a great guy in terms of he's a player's coach, and his ability to lead this particular team and communicate and bond with this team. I think that's why he was hired. But the Broncos don't have a defensive problem. We haven't had a defensive problem in 4 years, it seems like. The problem with the Broncos is on the offensive side of the football, and that's why it seemed like Kyle Shanahan was just such a perfect fit for what we need. So for us to hire a defensive-minded coach when we're already kind of a defensive-heavy team doesn't make sense, because I don't think this really fixes the problems that the Broncos currently have. I mean, the Broncos' offense last year was the main reason why we didn't make the playoffs. It's the main reason why we finished 9-7. And don't get me wrong, the play calling from Kubiak and Rick Dennison was as atrocious as the play on the field. But this offensive last year was terrible. I mean, this offensive line was the worst, as I mentioned earlier, grouping of offensive linemen I've seen in Denver, probably in my time as a Denver Broncos fan. Like, the whole right side of our offensive line needs to be reconstructed. Like, Donald Stevenson needs to be cut. Michael Schofield needs to be cut. Russell Okung shouldn't be back after his level of play this year. The only guy that realistically that you could bring back that started this year for us on the offensive front is Matt Paradis. So obviously you have a lot of issues there along the offensive front. You still have quarterback questions. You got 2 young quarterbacks in Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch, who neither seem to be ready to start. I know Trevor Siemian had some nice moments, and that's all great, but the reality is we finished 9-7 with the guys that are starting quarterback. He's not a starting caliber quarterback on a championship level team. That's a fact. And you just have a lack of playmakers as well on your offense, whether it be at the tight end position or the running back position. Didn't help that C.J. Anderson got hurt, but even before that, it's not like he was having a world beater type of year. And Devontae Booker, I mean, he was okay. Justin Forsett was okay. From the tight end position, A.J. Derby, Virgil Green, Jeff Heuerman, none of them provided any spark, especially in the passing game. And again, it starts back not only from the fact that you have 2 very young, somewhat incapable quarterbacks, but you also have a atrocious offensive line. And bringing in a defensive-minded guy like Vance Joseph, it's like, is he really gonna help cure those offensive woes, because again, this was a terrible offensive unit for the Broncos. Last season, we ranked 27th in total offense, 21st in passing offense, 27th in rushing offense. Our O-line gave up 40 sacks, which ranked 9th most in the NFL last season. So we didn't have a defensive problem. Our problems definitely this season, you can blame most of them on the offense and on the offensive play calling. So to hire a defensive coach, that's kind of where I'm scratching my head with Elway. And if Vance Joseph ends up being fired in 2 or 3 years, this is not going to be a great look for Elway. So this hiring is a big one for Elway, and it's a big one for our future. Obviously, it's one that I like, but it's one that I'm very supportive of. I like Vance Joseph. To me, he reminds me a lot of Mike Tomlin. Just kind of his come up to becoming a head coach, and his personality and his prior experience. They're very similar. So that's what's giving me hope. Is I do think Vance Joseph is a lot like Mike Tomlin. You've seen what Mike Tomlin's done in Pittsburgh. I think he can kind of bring back that discipline, and again, just kind of bring back that unity that our locker rooms, it seemed to be missing this year under Kubiak. But I'm not sure if he's the guy that we needed for this current team, excuse me, in terms of fixing our current problems. I think Kyle Shanahan might have been better, especially for the development of Paxton Lynch going forward, and just kind of fixing that offense and getting it back to where it needs to be, because I'm not sure Vance Joseph is the head coach to do that. But nonetheless, I like this hire. I think he's a great leader. All his players and former colleagues love him. He's obviously a guy that's got a great personality. He's got a great knack and ability to communicate with players and manage relationships. I think he'll bring back that chemistry in our locker room. He's a leader, man. Our defense, I think, is going to love him. And I think our defense, our level of defense is going to stay where it's at. And I think for our defensive backs, our young guys like Justin Simmons, Will Parks, Bradley Roby even, I think this will be great for their development going forward, and hiring a guy like Vance Joseph as well. But be interesting to see if this really was the guy, the right hire for this current team and this current time and what we need. But nonetheless, welcome Vance Joseph back to the great state of Colorado, and congratulations to him on being named the head coach of the Denver Broncos. Really looking forward to seeing what he does going forward, and seeing him kind of structure his staff and what his philosophy does going forward. I really like this guy. Again, I think he can be like the next Mike Tomlin and have that effect on our team, and I can't wait to see him go to work. So mile high salute to Mr. Vance Joseph being named the new head coach of the Denver Broncos. Leave me a comment below, guys. What do you think of Vance Joseph being the new head coach of the Broncos? What did you think of this past season with the Broncos going 9-7 and missing the Super Bowl? Or excuse me, missing the Super Bowl. Obviously we missed the Super Bowl, but missing the playoffs. And what do you think of Kubiak stepping down? Just leave me a comment below. Love to hear your guys' thoughts as always. And that's it for me, guys. Tough year for the Broncos, but on to bigger and better things. Look forward to this new era with Vance Joseph as the head coach, and hopefully we can get back on track. You again, guys, and as always, go Broncos. Congrats to Vance Joseph. Look forward to seeing what he does as a new head coach of the Denver Broncos in this upcoming season.